प्रसार भारती अभिलेखागार की प्रस्तुति सदाबहार सुनहरे दौर का अनमोल खजाना।
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Frame to Frame. I am Hariharan, bringing to you the highlights of the 100 years of cinema's existence from the hallowed floors of the Maryland Studios, Trivandrum, one of the earliest studios to be built in India. March 22nd, 1895 is an unforgettable date. On that day, the Lumia Brothers held the projection of their first motion picture to a very select audience in Paris. Looking at the favorable response by the audience, the Lumia brothers went back and assembled a package of 10 short films. On 28 December 1895, they held their first commercial screening of their films in a basement of a Parisian hotel. This time, the audience paid for their tickets and waited with bated breath. The audience sat absolutely mesmerized, and especially when they saw the image of the steam engine chugging into a railway station. Most of them thought it to be real, and some of them even ran out of the auditorium. Can you believe that? Well, the magic of that illusion tickled the imagination of a professional magician. His name was GeorgeMZ. So off he went to the Lumia brothers, asking them if he could buy one of those cameras and projection machines. The shrewd Lumia brothers obviously saw the potential threat in Magic George and promptly showed him the door. But Millais was a determined magician. Unfortunately, he could not produce a projector from his hat. So off he went to the UK and other places in search of engineers. And within 1 year, by 1896, he was ready with his projector and camera. He was all set to enthrall audiences the world over with his magic theatre. The story cinema was finally born. Produced in 1902, this film achieved international distribution. A Trip to the Moon was 825 feet long and ran for a total of 14 minutes. Inspired from the science fiction writings of Jules Verne, this film is about a group of astronomers who decide to travel to the moon in a rocket. This rocket is launched into space with a circus cannon and by a bevy of female marines in short pants. It is not known as to what was in Méliès's mind when he created the moon with a puzzled face. Was it a magician's way of scoffing at these so-called scientists? Anyway, this crazy projectile lands in the eye of the moon, the travelers tumble out, and the astronomers marvel at the sight of planet Earth as seen from the moon. He called these artificially arranged scenes as moving tableaux. Charlie Chaplin called George Méliès the alchemist of light. But my all-time favorite film is this one about a magician. Some of the tricks demonstrated in this film, made in 1901, has no parallel even today. Wasn't that sheer magic? Well, if George Méliès was responsible for the phantasmagoric story cinema, then across the Atlantic Ocean, in New York City, a man called Edwin Porter was responsible for the first realistic narrative cinema. Porter began his career as a projectionist. And one day, he chanced upon a roll of unedited rushes shot by the Edison Film Company. In it, he saw images of a drill being conducted by firemen trying to put out a fire on a building. But to his utter surprise, he found that each time he arranged the shots in a different manner, there was a different story. These tableaux of images that you see from this film was to be the precursor of the modern edited narrative cinema.
The most significant contribution of Edwin S. Porter to cinema is the idea of what is popularly known as editing, and through editing or the joining of shots taken at different points of time to bring in a certain kind of dramatic output. Because he, by sheer accident, found that by rearranging the shots in a particular order, you can bring out tremendous amount of drama, which, though not inherent in the shots, but can come out of their arrangement.
But it was with his next film in 1903 that Edwin Porter really made history. And it seemed so natural that the first dramatic idea that strikes a young American lad is an action adventure. A group of bandits come to rob a railway train, make a getaway, and the police chase them and finally trap them. This film was called The Great Train Robbery. Porter certainly created a new experience for the audience. You can see for yourself the real intensity which the actors here put into their performance. The actual details of a railway station and the typical strategies of the bandits to hoodwink the station master. Porter cleverly manages to utilize the realistic routine of a railway station and its yard to weave in his story of how armed bandits manage to enter a train which is carrying hard currency and then loot it all after blowing up the cash box. Although there was no sound on the film in those days, the early film was never silent. There was always a small orchestra in the music pit in front of the screen which would be playing some appropriate music. One must notice here how the camera is shooting from such a long distance, and the fact that it keeps filming continuously till the action ends. This information passes on to another location where the sheriff and the good guys who are having a small party at another place. They then swing into action immediately and very quickly reach the spot where the bad guys are seen distributing their spoils. Thus was born the art of parallel editing and also the first gangster western film. And then, here we have cinema's first close-up. This adventure film was to give birth to a whole genre of Western movies. Most of you will remember Clint Eastwood and his cowboy films, including his most recent film called Unforgiven. In one of his later films, Porter did something immensely important to the history of cinema. The year was 1907, and the film was called Rescued from an Eagle's Nest. In this film, he provided the chance to a young, struggling, needy lad who was soon to refine the language of cinema, elaborate it, and finally transcend the medium to become the father of the modern narrative cinema. His name was David Wark Griffith. Coming from a very poor family, Griffith had tried his hand at almost anything, from shoveling coal in railway yards to selling copies of the Encyclopedia Britannica door to door. And then, when he blundered into Porter's film set, he saw a new answer to the quest for telling those stories lying deep within his heart. Within just 1 year, he got the opportunity to direct his first film in 1908. In the following years, he experimented with every possible capability of the camera and the medium, and evolved most of the rules for screenplay and direction that we filmmakers continue to follow until this day. When the First World War broke out in faraway Europe, Griffith was to launch his first powerful attack on the silver screen. The Birth of a Nation was the longest movie ever made for those days and the most expensive at $110,000. The dramatic saga of the American Civil War is seen from a point of view as tender as this parting scene to the lavish opera set where President Abraham Lincoln is present to witness the victory celebrations. It is in the midst of all this that Booth assassinates President Lincoln. This film, which members of the film industry then wrote off as the biggest monstrosity ever made, ended up collecting $15 million. So overwhelming was the public response that even President Woodrow Wilson said that it is like writing history with lightning. Of course, like all artistic works, this film too had its staunch critics who called it very racist.
Unfortunately, like many people of his time, he had a very racist perception of history. To what extent his own racism was conscious and rejected consciously, I do not know. And it is difficult for us to judge afterwards. My view on this is that given the societies in which we are brought up, our various cultures, I think one is born a racist and one has to become tolerant.
Griffith felt deeply wounded by all the accusations that were being flung at him. And as if in retaliation, the wounded Griffith decided to make an explanation film, tracing the origins of human beings' intolerance. Ironically also titled by the same name, Intolerance tried to portray the cruel attitude of the ruling class towards their masses from the biblical period through the medieval eras to the contemporary times. The struggle of good against evil, the saga of love and charity against the oppressive forces of hatred and intolerance. The anguish is best depicted in this last-minute rescue sequence. Here we see a young innocent man is about to be hanged by the cruel authorities. But thanks to the untiring efforts of his poor wife and a lawyer, he manages to get a reprieve, and finally he is saved from the gallows. Griffith demonstrates his superior skills of parallel cutting, close-ups, extreme long shots, and melodramatic expressions. All of them together create the required effect, which remains as the basic grammar of film even today.
One of the most important things that he invented the concept of editing a scene. That means before Griffith, like Milian and Porter, they had few shots in a film, but each scene was a one shot, and only they had a new shot when they had a new scene. Griffith understood that you can cut a scene in the middle. So he had one scene in one room, and people are walking, and he's divided the scene to shots. And this point is the turning point in cinema, because actually before cinema wasn't cinema really, it was a recorded theater. They had a theater, theater stage, and they just shot it. And Griffith, by the way that he cut the scene, he actually made it a new language.
The American audiences of 1916 found intolerance too serious and morose a theme, especially at a time when they were entering a war in Europe. The film was an unparalleled box office disaster. But the failure of Intolerance did not hamper the creative spirit of Griffith. He went on to make 23 more feature films, and in 1919 he made a wonderful film called Broken Blossoms. Broken Blossoms is about a young waif of the London slums who's brutally mistreated by her father, but she finds solace and comfort in the chaste love of a Chinese boy. When this film was released, it was tinted in soft pastel colors to enhance the compassionate soft focus quality of the film. The lighting in this film by cameraman Billy Bidser is certainly reminiscent of the European Impressionist painters. And looking at the tenderness with which the actors have enacted their emotional scenes, Griffith seems to hark back to his early ambitions when he wanted to be the Charles Dickens of the silver screen. This tragic story, however, did become a runaway success at the box office. Charlie Chaplin, who was one of the distributors for this film, chose to call Griffith as the Shakespeare of the screen. Reassured, Griffith went on to make a variety of films and establish the true Hollywood traditions. Sequences like the modern story from Intolerance were to even inspire Soviet directors like Eisenstein, Kuleshov, and Pudovkin. Griffith, however, did not anticipate another technological marvel around the corner. It was the advent of sound in 1928. Although he did make a couple of films in sound, they were total disasters. Griffith withdrew into complete anonymity. Friends and producers who deserted him at this time when he needed them so much did turn up 17 years later to attend his funeral in 1948. Did such a fate befall him because he contributed so much in so short a time? Was he a filmmaker far ahead of his time? Or is the medium so powerful that it does not give the filmmaker a second chance? It is often said that filmmakers are usually known by the last film that they make.